So that's all the housekeeping done. So now I can introduce today's talk. So with no agreed upon definition of consciousness, it's extremely difficult to create robust tests for it. In a recent study attempting to map out the field of consciousness, Robert Kuhn identified over 200 distinct theories. So how do we measure something that is so contested? Rethink Priorities is attempting to solve that problem. It describes itself as a think and do tank that through research and action improves the lives of humans and animals, both now and in the future. And recently, its Worldview Investigation Team turned its attention to the issue of digital minds. Today we have with us Arvo Muñoz Morán, who will be discussing Rethink's approach. Arvo is a senior researcher in the Worldview Investigations Team, sorry, at Rethink Priorities, and he also does work for Oxford Global Priorities Institute. Before that, he was a research analyst at the Forethought Foundation for Global Priorities Research and earned an MPhil in economics at the University of Oxford. Arvo will be showing us some early results from their digital consciousness model and talking about plans for the future. So he's going to spend about 40 to 45 minutes giving a talk, and the rest of the session will be dedicated to questions. Please use the Q&A for questions, because that'll be easier for me to collate. So there's a Q&A button that people should be able to see that they can click on and use questions. And we can chat in the chat's also open as well. So I'll be keeping an eye on that as well, just in case. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Arvo to start his talk. Over to you, Arvo.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Hello, Prism. It's wonderful to not see you all, but to know that you are out there. Today we're going to do something completely different. We're going to talk about AI, which is going to feel very novel. And so in particular, we're going to talk about consciousness. And I want to ask this question. I want to start with, what does it mean to be conscious? I always find it very difficult to introduce this question of consciousness because, as you know, and as you've possibly thought about, it's at the very center of everything we experience. It's at the very core of who we are and what we do and this moment right now and every moment we ever live. So it sometimes feels a bit like staring into our own eyes or perhaps supervising the supervisor to try and investigate this conscious concept. And so if it isn't trying to kiss our own lips, and if it's not impossible, then let's see how far we can get. And you might ask, well, how hard is this really? There's something literally called in philosophy, some of you may know, the hard problem of consciousness. And this is a philosophical rabbit hole, as I will signal with this question mark and this rabbit in the corner. We're not going to go into these philosophical rabbit holes, but it gives you a sense of the history, the depth of this problem, and how hard humanity thinks it is to investigate this. Can we make it harder? I think we can. So typically consciousness we study in the context of human beings. Now, that's hard enough, but what about systems that are less familiar to us? So we can ask which systems are conscious that are not just the system that we're presumably most familiar with, which is ourselves. And just a parenthesis here, some of you might be thinking, well, is consciousness the thing that we want to study, depending on what we're interested in morally? And we'll talk about that. Could we be interested in sentience instead? Could we ask which systems are welfare subjects instead? Could we think about moral patience? In this talk, and for the purposes of what we're discussing, even though these concepts are very interrelated and have these complex connections and nuanced differences, we're going to kind of assume that they collapse in some way. We're going to say, for the purposes of studying certain system, we're going to concentrate on consciousness, but in the back of our minds, for the motivation, we're going to somewhat collapse these notions. Again, this is a philosophical rabbit hole to really dispel all the nuances and disentangle them. We're not going to do that today. All right, so if we're going to do this hard thing, who will care? Like, who will be listening at the other end besides you, besides me and other crazy people? Is there someone in society that will listen? What kind of change could we bring about from trying to tackle this question? And the idea with asking whether AI is conscious, the answer is some labs and people already do. So last May, we had this tweet from Rosie, who used to work at OpenAI, and is now working at this place called Elios, where they do welfare evaluations, and she's congratulating and saying, "Oh, amazing! Anthropic has this hole in their system card, which is this kind of report card that AI systems come with when they're published. They have a whole chapter on welfare, and she's talking about that here." Before that, April, Anthropic had this whole page on exploring model welfare. And as you can see from the YouTube title, it says, "Could AI models be conscious?" So clearly, we're kind of barking at an interesting tree here. Before I move on to this paper, I'll just say, you might be thinking, okay, Anthropic is a bit of an exception. Maybe other labs won't care. But I think it's quite big. Claude is nothing to sneeze at, and B, it's a movement that, in my opinion, at least, should grow. And this is quite the start. So this paper, which I think by now can be considered relatively highly influential, which was Butlin, Longit, and others, talks about insights from the science of consciousness and artificial intelligence, and it basically asks this question of which systems are conscious. How can we bring all the best theories now to tackle this complicated question? They don't then try and do the further thing, at least yet. They probably are working on this. In fact, they have some incoming work. They don't yet try and quantify things. They basically create this taxonomy of, these are the general philosophical theories of interest. These are the general theories in other spaces like neuroscience that could be useful, and they put them in a useful system and taxonomy, but they don't go the further step, which we will talk about today. They also have this paper which they say, let's take AI welfare seriously. Let's not just forget about how important welfare is, especially if it can be had by many systems. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right, so this is just a second. Why bother? There's many things we can say as to why we might want to think about AI consciousness. I'm going to focus on two things. The first is this. So suppose that we have a society where AI becomes very sophisticated, it's part of our lives, it's everywhere in our economy, and we decide, okay, we are better people than we have been in history. We're going to give it a stake in our society. We're going to give it rights. We might give it the right to vote, for example. We're going to try and respect its preferences. We're going to try and interact with the system in a very respectful way, and we're doing everything we can, or at least we're reasonably attempting to do what we can to give it a stake in our society. Now, suppose in this scenario, which is the first of two scenarios that I'll discuss, AI isn't actually conscious. AI doesn't actually have subjective experiences, isn't a welfare subject in the way that we imagine, for example, we are. And then the way that we imagined in this scenario that it was. So here we have a grave misallocation of resources, because we've in fact gone out of our way and done a lot to give this system a lot of space in society. And those, as you're aware of, we have many problems in this world, and those resources could have been better spent in other very real troubles that humanity and other conscious beings have. And so we want to avoid the scenario where we over-attribute consciousness. There are other problems with it, but this is just one angle that I wanted to talk about. The other thing, which is perhaps more likely given our track record and our attitudes even just right now, is that we develop AI and we have it as part of our economy and it's everywhere, but we hurt AI in the way that we use it. It could be intentional, it could be accidental, it doesn't matter. The point is we are careless about this, and AI and many systems that are actually conscious hurt, even just a tiny bit. The scale of these systems could be so massive that this is a very real concern, and this could be the next moral catastrophe in the history of humanity. So those are the two scenarios of why we should bother to do this. Okay, now returning to this, how hard is this thing? The reality is we've studied consciousness for a while, we've thought about consciousness for a while, and we have always had, and very much still have, a lot of uncertainty in this domain. And so what can we do? So what we think we can do, or at least some of my colleagues and I think we can do, is we can structure the landscape, and we can see how the evidence and how these different theories that we have, that even though we don't have the best ways of seeing which ones are correct, or at least to the extent that we would want to see them and test them as correct, we want to structure this evidence and these theories and tackle this uncertainty head on. I think somebody should try, and even if it's the case that there are theories that we haven't yet thought about, we think it's very important to structure what we have thought about, and have our best guess and track our best guess. We'll talk about this. All right, so far, we've basically asked ourselves, what does it mean to be conscious, introduced, motivated this problem, thought about who might care and why we should. Next, we're gonna talk about some key ingredients of the model. The rest is basically the model and this attempt to structure the evidence and the theories of consciousness. So we're going to talk about the model. We're going to talk about some of the assumptions that it makes. We'll mention some stances, and I'll say what that means in a bit. And then we're going to look at some results. We're going to think about the future and let you guys grill me in the Q&A. So, what are some of the key ingredients of the model? The first is this word, stances. You could think of stances as theories of consciousness. It's not a bad alternative for the name. The reason we chose stances is as follows. We want to include things, perhaps unlike the paper that I mentioned, we want to include things that aren't just the formal academic, well-established theories of consciousness. We want to allow perspectives on consciousness that are perhaps just more intuitive, or that people have had throughout time, but that don't neatly fit in the traditional philosophical perspectives. We want to have both. It's not that we don't want to have the formal theories. We think there's a very important place for these, but we want to have more general intuitive perspectives of consciousness as well. And so we use this term stances. What are some of the stances that we might want to be thinking about? So today we're mostly going to mention 5 of these. There's more. In our model we have 13 and we're developing more. But right now there's too many, so we're going to think about fewer. One stance could be how person-like something is, how person-like that system is. And you might think, okay, insofar as something is person-like, that thing is conscious. Another stance is to have a biological analogy, so to really lean onto the kind of carbon structure of things. Another one, which is more on the formal side, in fact, 2 of these, is global workspace theory and hot theory, which is not about how attractive the theory is, it's about higher order thought, and we will chat about that in just a second. The second ingredient, so we have stances at the top. We have features as well. So the idea with features is, what are these core clusters of things that we care about, of elements that, when I say we, I should really say the stances care about. So very easy to understand with examples. Attention, intelligence, language ability, complexity, self-modeling. These are the types of features that, depending on the stance, you would think are necessary or, if not necessary, conducive to consciousness. And lastly, we have indicators, which is the kind of like the bottom layer, the puzzle pieces that, that we study to be able to tell whether features are there and therefore whether the stance thinks some system is conscious. And so indicators are things like carbon-based mood states. Does a system have social learning? Does it have a persistent identity, self-recognition, etc.? Let's just, I'm going to tell you. So we have these three ingredients. What is the recipe? We take them, we mix them until you get probability of consciousness. And how do you mix them? You do this, or at least we did this. So this is a hierarchical Bayesian model, which is what we use. It's like fancy name for, we have layers of these concepts that we're interested in, and it kind of flows in such a way that we don't know, we don't have enough information about stances directly, we don't have enough information about features directly, but we can test the systems or make educated guesses about the system's indicators, whether an indicator is present or absent for a particular system, including AI, is the thought. And so these are latent, unobserved things towards the top, and we have observations that are uncertain at the very bottom. And let's go through an example so that we can wrap our hands around this structure. So we have, what's one stance we could have? Higher order thought theory. So higher order thought is having, essentially, when you have a thought about a thought, we'll save some more, but if you had to boil it down to something is conscious when you have a thought about a thought, where that thing has a thought about a thought. Now you might think, what do you need to have a thought about a thought? Well, you might need to self-model to see who you are in this world, how you work. And to be able to self-model, one indicator is to self-recognize. It might be others, but this is just one. Because we're on a roll, let's do another example. If your stance was biological analogy, then perhaps you would think, okay, organic composition is a key feature, being made of organic matter. What does it mean to be made of organic matter? It's to be carbon-based. And so you directly ask, is this system carbon-based? If it isn't, and your stance is biological analogy, then you're that much less likely to be conscious. I have this arrow to remind me here to talk about these links. Basically, these are evidential and kind of represent our thoughts on how these stances, features, and indicators are linked. And so they have weight, and they are, not all indicators will give the same kind of evidence towards a certain feature. Not all features will give the same kind of evidence towards a certain stance. So some will be very important, perhaps even, so in this framework, we're not fully at 100% ever at necessity or sufficiency. This is a technical thing that we can discuss at the Q&A, but you can get very close. And so we can say, if something isn't there, if an indicator isn't there, we can make sure that the model takes the probability of the feature down a lot, and therefore the stance, and therefore of consciousness. And so these links are important, and that's not the only important thing. So let's talk about some assumptions. The first I wanted to mention is conditional independence. So the model assumes that conditional on its parent, each node's children are independent. Now, if this broke, that would be bad news, because, for example, you could have multiple indicators being present, and if they're not independent in the way that we've supposed, and we've really tried to carve up the indicator space to do our best here, but if it wasn't the case, then we would be double counting evidence, because it would be like, like having a test about this, essentially the same thing. The tests are correlated, and so we see 2 yeses, but really we should count them as 1 yes for those indicators when we're thinking about whether the feature is present. Another assumption we made is some priors. So we talked about these links, and because it's a Bayesian structure, we need to have some sort of prior belief about things, and we assume a beta distribution for all probabilities. This is for tractability purposes. We also like beta distributions. They're very flexible. Depending on which 2 parameters you use, you can do a lot. You can represent a lot with them, but indeed not everything. And in particular, if you had a prior belief that was bimodal, so that it's either for sure present or for sure absent, that would be very hard to represent with beta. But we can talk about that some more. This is what they look like. And you'll notice, so this is 4 different parameterizations. So they have 2 parameters, the alpha and the beta, and you can have the uniform. You can represent uniform when these 2 parameters are this 1. And then you can do other things that look a bit more like normal. And you'll notice that it's always between 0 and 1, which is what we want for these probabilities. We have a third assumption, which is that these nodes are meaningful and consistent. If an indicator was total nonsense, then it would just add noise to this model, and that wouldn't be good. One last assumption that I wanted to mention is that the nodes are binary, which is to say they're either present or absent. Now, you might be thinking, this is weird for some things, like, for example, complexity or intelligence even. And we can discuss that more thoroughly in the Q&A, but it's less of a big assumption that you might expect, in particular because you might introduce thresholds. So you might just say, yes, this thing is continuous, but insofar as it crosses this threshold, we can say it has crossed a threshold. It's an assumption nonetheless, and it's important to flag it. All right, so let's talk about some stances, and then I'm going to have you do some work as well. But first, let's just recap the 5 stances that we had. Okay, so the first is global workspace, which I mentioned was one of the more technical ones. It says, consciousness arises when information from specialized modules is broadcasted across a mental workspace, making it widely accessible for other cognitive processes, like reasoning or decision-making. This feels like a technical definition. So let's go through an example. So imagine you're at a party, God forbid, and there's a crowded conversation, and suddenly you hear someone call your name from across the room. At that point, the thought with the stance is that your specialized auditory module detects the sound pattern of your name, and then that recognition is broadcast into the global workspace, your global workspace. And because it's now globally accessible internally, then your language module can kick in, interpret it, and say, oh, they're talking to me. Your attentional system can shift focus, and your decision-making can prompt you to turn towards the speaker and perhaps go and talk to this person. So that's what global workspace is. And hearing your name in this example becomes a conscious experience precisely because it's been shared across multiple systems via this thing called the global workspace. All right. And then we have another one, which is person-like. Here, we're just supposing consciousness is attributed based on the resemblance to human persons in normal interactions. Interacting with the system feels like interacting with a person, a bit like if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck, something like that. If you think something is conscious, or in this particular, even more narrow sense, if you think something is person-like, then you're going to think it's conscious. We have another one, which is biological analogy, saying the best evidence we have for consciousness is that a system is similar to us biologically. We have cognitive complexity, which is perhaps intuitive. Consciousness arises in systems that exhibit a certain level of complexity and intelligence. And then last, I wanted to mention higher order thought again, which is the one that I said thought about a thought. It emerges from the ability of a system to represent its own mental states. Again, it's a bit more on the technical side, so I'll just quickly do an example. Imagine you're reading a novel and you start feeling uneasy, but you can't pinpoint why. At first, that uneasiness is a first order state. It's an emotional response. Then you form a higher order thought. I am feeling uneasy about what's happening next, for example, or about this character, whatever. That higher order thought turns the vague discomfort into a conscious feeling of, for example, suspense. Now you can reflect on it, discuss it, decide to put the book down, precisely because your mind has represented its own state. So that's the idea with higher order thought. All right. So enough about me for a little while. I wanted to have you guys do a very short exercise where you take 3 to 5 minutes. Really, there's too much in this document, but I'm going to share with you this handout, and you can skim through it and then focus your attention on one of these stances, and then post on the chat. Let me just. Oh yes, thank you very much. Will has beat me to it. That is the link to the handout. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to think about what is one strength or weakness that you identify with just one of these stances. It doesn't have to be all of them. There's a lot of questions to kind of get you thinking in the document, but just think about a strength or a weakness, and write a short comment about it in the chat. And we'll be with you in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so we'll just take a 5-minute pause or 3-minute pause, and yeah, come back. Thanks, Arvo, so far. If anyone's having trouble getting into the document, let me know and I can send it again. I'll put a clickable version in because can you put a clickable version in, Arvo? Mine doesn't
Yeah, no
seem
worries.
to.
I'll put the non-chat.
Yeah, I can't seem to share the I think the idea is to put comments in the chat
right.
rather
So
than yeah.
exactly right. So don't worry about the document itself. Just in the chat, you can say this thing is my favorite or my least favorite thing and why.
I see quite a good question on if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday who asked ChatGPT to quack like a duck, and it said, I won't do that because I only do dignified responses. And in the end, he had to coax it into quacking like a duck by writing a play where the GPT played a duck, and he ended up making it quack.
All the grammar stories in the place can get very far. Sure. So we have, I'm going to start reading some as they come, but people feel free to take a couple more minutes. So Matthew, yes. So Matthew says, for person like ChatGPT is human-like, quacks like a duck to many people, but obviously isn't a duck, i.e. human, or in this case, perhaps conscious. And also for bio, Matthew says lots of bio things aren't obviously conscious. Obviously aren't conscious. Steve Faber thinks that these aren't testable in a kind of a useful way. Hani thinks that global workspace theory, sorry, the chat is moving, provides a useful framework for understanding consciousness. However, it may oversimplify the rich distributed nature of brain activity by focusing too heavily on this notion of central workspace. Yes, we are supposed to. Here is good, Swami. If you put a couple of thoughts here, that's good. There's a lot. I'm not going to be able to read them all. I'll read a couple more and then we'll move on. I favor higher order thought theory, says Megan, but not. Oh, yeah, I favor higher order theories, but not so much higher order thought. Double T, I'm not sure there, but my reasoning is having to do with versions of higher order thought theories being able to solve reality monitoring problem. And then she shares some things she wrote about metacognition and higher order thoughts, which people can look at there on archive. Higher order thought theory. Okay, cool. Yes, the double T is just the theory. Last one I'm going to read. Isuru says, complexity appeals to me from a physics perspective. If the universe had a global memory, like RAM in a video game, structures that are complex enough can interact with the world as well as the global memory. All right, so feel free to leave a couple more thoughts. But for now, we're gonna move on in a way of recapping what we think are some of the strengths or weaknesses of these exact 5 stances. So global workspace theory, it's perhaps the best developed theory in consciousness, of consciousness in animals and neuroscience and philosophy. And it explains some of the key aspects of consciousness, including its relationship with attention and its cognitive function. On the other hand, weaknesses are that it was developed for human consciousness in particular, and the theory can be kind of unclear on what is required for a global workspace and other kinds of entities, which is the task at hand here. It also may be capturing access consciousness, so our ability to make information available for action, instead of what is traditionally thought of as phenomenal consciousness, a subjective feeling. And then we have person-like. If we want to predict when people will attribute consciousness to AIs, this stance may be particularly helpful. So this is kind of like a descriptive use rather than a normative. We attribute consciousness to many systems on the basis of our social interactions with them and imagined observations of their agency. Perhaps we should use, so the stance goes, the same evidence to attribute consciousness to machines, for example, Turing tests. Problems are plenty. People commonly attribute consciousness on the basis of features that don't seem to matter. For example, whether something has eyes, and it may be just unduly anthropocentric, denying consciousness to animals and other individuals who are not human-like. Biological analogy, we know that consciousness is a trait of biological organisms. Many organisms around us we believe are conscious, in particular biological organisms around us. Our most concrete evidence about consciousness is that we have it. And if it evolved because it played some important biological role, then it makes sense to infer consciousness based on biological features. The weaknesses is that this view presents far greater skepticism about consciousness in radically different sorts of systems that many people are comfortable with. This view, again, it could amount to just simply biological chauvinism. Cognitive complexity, it matches the common judgment that more intelligent creatures, for example, humans and apes, have richer conscious experiences than less intelligent creatures like mice and flies. Problem is that our common intuition about the correlation between consciousness and intelligence might be wrong, in fact, probably is wrong, and just as many as of our intuitive hierarchies of species have been wrong. Consciousness also seems to accompany less intelligent cognitive processes such as perception. So it's unclear why we need to think about complexity so much in that sense. Higher order thought, I'm blitzing through these, but it's just a recap, and it's to allow you guys to have a sense for these. Explains the link between consciousness and self-awareness, and it captures the intuitive notion that I have introspective awareness of those things that I'm currently conscious of. Problems are that by requiring metacognition, it might entail that most non-human animals, for example, dogs, immediately just lack consciousness, which seems at odds with the evidence. Something like if we require having a thought about a thought and we think dogs don't have a thought about a thought, then they're just immediately ruled out. It's the thought in this bullet point. All right, so we're going to take stock, and there's many perspectives on consciousness. There are others, many beyond these 5. Already in this model, we have 13 instead of 5. But I'm going to ask you to focus on these 5. And I'm going to ask you, which stances would you lend your highest and lowest credences to? Which is to say, by credence, I mean, which do you assign the highest probability? Which is your favorite? Which is your least favorite? You're going to have to submit your answers on Zoom. Will is going to help me with a poll just now. And you're going to have 3 options. It should have popped on your screen. And one option is going to be highest credence. Another is going to be lowest. You're only allowed to have one highest and one lowest. Everything else should read in between for your particular set of answers.
We're going to have to trust you just to pick one high and one low. But the poll's now live. You should be able to answer it. And
we'll give you a minute.
We'll just give you a couple of minutes on that. Yeah. We've got lots of questions in the chat I'm seeing, but just a reminder, if you could put the actual questions in the Q&As, it'll be easier for me to collate them all at the end. Okay, we've got 33, 35 answers, so 37. Okay, so people are still answering, so hang on a couple more minutes. Okay, we've got 42 out of 60, so I think we're doing pretty well. I'm going to end the poll in 10 seconds. If anyone's still thinking, if anyone's debating their answers. Cool, it seems to have stopped around the 42. So end poll, and Arvo, you should be able to see the results. I'm going to share them. There you go. Can you see them now?
Yes. Okay, so let's see. So some people, so it's kind of more of an even split than I would have imagined. Person like stands out for the lowest credence. So a lot of people, I think correctly, or at least I share this view, think that person like is not particularly helpful. And then we have biological analogy is the second lowest credence. So like people, the second most least favorite. And lowest credence is placed on the other 3 at about the same amount. Just about 3 people think that the other 3 are not very good. And cognitive complexity takes it away with the highest credence. And then after that, global workspace and higher order thought are very similar. In fact, they're identical at 10 people thinking that they're the best way forward among these 5 options, which admittedly is not the whole landscape. All right. So hopefully you can have that in mind when we talk about some of the results in a bit. So what you came for, early results. What are some of the early results from us running this model? What we did, basically, we don't have data on many of the indicators. Just so that to remind you, indicator is something like the mirror test, and the feature above it could be something like self-other distinction. This could be useful for a number of stances, including higher order thought, for example. And so the mirror test is this idea, this test that is commonly administered to children and sometimes animals. For example, chimps famously pass the mirror test, where they see themselves in a mirror, they can tell it's them eating a banana or whatever they're doing. And humans don't always pass the mirror test. We're born unable to pass this test. And as we age, and if you have a somewhat typical development, you eventually are able to pass the mirror test. Adults are able to pass it. How do we adjust these tests? And indeed, there was some discussion about testing the theories in the chat. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. How do we adjust these tests for something like AI? In the case of a mirror test, one idea has been, if you fed an AI a screenshot of almost like a fractal-like screenshot, when you share your screen and you're sharing that you're sharing your screen, that kind of thing. You share a screenshot of you talking to the AI and you ask it, what is this? If it goes, oh, this is you talking to me. This is a screenshot of us interacting right now, and all the elements in the screen are where they should be, and so on. This could be a version of passing it. Whether it's an adequate adaptation of the test, that's very much a controversial question. And so what we've done is, instead of going through some of the controversy ourselves, we've asked experts which indicators do they think apply to different systems. When it's easy, we've filled it out ourselves. Like if something is carbon-based, we can answer that question. But when it's more controversial, like passing a mirror test or something that amounts to self-other distinction, we've asked experts. And so we insert this data at the indicator level, and then we run the model, this Bayesian hierarchical model that updates our probability. What are the results? So for AI, these are it. I want to focus just on there's too many stanzas. The stanzas are the different lines. If you look at the left, this is where the familiar stanzas that we've discussed are. And so the graph has this shape because that's the uncertainty. And as you can say, for example, something like cognitive complexity, there's a lot of uncertainty, meaning the runs of the model have uncertainty, and also the expert opinions diverge in the controversial tests and the controversial indicators. And so global workspace is very close to zero. Person-like is more something like 30% is the median. Biological analogy, as we expect, almost with no uncertainty, AI is not conscious according to biological analogy. Cognitive complexity, there are those that think that is like very near the top, and the median is slightly higher than 40%. So the left y-axis goes from 0 to 1. So that's that. Higher order thought theory is closer to 10%, and it has some uncertainty, but it's clustered around that 0 to 20% mark. All right. I should flag that it really, the way that you calibrate the model makes a big difference. And we don't have perfect ways of doing that. We're trying to gather more data. We're trying to ask more experts to review the model and to tell us which of the linkages that I explained, those arrows connecting things, which of those are important to calibrate in certain ways. But here we just have two calibrations, and I wanted to show you how, for example, for global workspace, under one of the calibrations, it's near 0% conscious, whereas for B, and the second calibration, it's closer to 15%, and it has uncertainty. It goes up into 40% in some runs of the model for that calibration. So it's a sizable difference. This is just saying you can to really read these graphs, and I added this here for those that are less familiar with this. You can think of like a distribution, like a normal distribution, for example, and then you can turn it, and that's what the kind of blob is like the bits where they have the highest width is where they have the highest density, much like you would near the center of a normal distribution. And that's what, for example, the orange person-like blob could be seen as. What about other systems? And before I show you, we've pooled all our data, and we've had an overarching view on this from an early results. We're still gathering more data. We're still running more simulations with the model. But we have some preliminary results. Before I show you, though, second Zoom poll, if I could have your help, Will.
Should be launched now.
Yeah. So I just want you guys to tell me, specifically for 2024, notice the 4 in 2024 leading LLMs, if you can remember that far back in technological history, and chicken and a human. The way that I've specified the ranges here is a slightly more formal notation. The square brackets means inclusive, and the round parenthesis means exclusive. So
I'm sorry, I didn't put in those brackets, so it just says 0% to 5%.
Okay, so forget about the brackets. Will has done you a favor and not made you think about anything mathematically seeming. All right. How are we doing with?
Yeah, we've got 45 people have replied so far, so it's quite a good amount, more than the last ones. So I'll just wait 10 more seconds if anyone's thinking. We're up to 46. Oh, I'm the only one who can see the results. They're quite interesting. I'll end the poll now, and then Arvo will have a look at the results.
All right. Okay, so first of all, disagreement with the chicken, and people didn't have a single unifying answer. The most popular one is that it's extremely likely to be conscious, between 95 and 100%. And then it kind of goes down in popularity, but some people think it isn't conscious. Four people don't think it's conscious, or like it's very unlikely to be conscious, between 0 and 5%, and another 4 people between 5 to 25%. For humans, so we have this 38 people thinking it's almost certainly conscious, and I always forget to say, but I really have in mind an adult human here. You can come up with all sorts of cases where humans and chickens are different, but I'm thinking of a kind of stereotypical chicken, a stereotypical human that's adult and in their full capacities. And then 2024 leading LLMs. So most people think it's 0 to 5%. But then some of you think, about 10 of you think it's closer to 5 to 25%. So it's a chunk devoted. Nobody thinks it's extremely likely to be conscious, but a couple of people think it's quite high. It's between 75 and 95%. All right. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you what the model thinks. So the model thinks it kind of represents this, it kind of agrees with your poll in a way. Let's go one by one. Let's go LLMs. So it's about 16% is the median for whether it's conscious or not. But a lot of density is below it, as you can see from how thick it is underneath. So that's kind of the 0 to 5% that you guys have, and then a bit less, and 5 to 25, and a bit less. And so it has the same dynamic that your poll had, in fact. There's nothing above kind of 90%, just like with you. There's nothing above 95%. For a human, I've said human, even though it's to the right. Let's do human first, the green one. It's very close to 100, very, very similar to you guys. There's some people, there's one person that thinks that humans between 25 and 50%. That's actually in the model too. There's this tiny outlier, this blip of like, okay, if things are a certain way, then it might be the case that humans could be kind of 50-50, depending on what your stances are. And that's okay. Like there are some stances that really you might not lend credence to, or that indeed you might. And then chicken, the last one that I'll discuss. The model is very uncertain about this, which is to say, depending on the calibrations, depending on some of the noise, depending on the expert judgments, a lot, and the stances indeed that you run, a lot of different answers are possible. The mean answer is under 40%. It's kind of 35%, but there's a sizable bit that goes up. It goes up to pretty much 90 something percent. And let me decompose this a bit so that you can get a sense of where the uncertainty is kind of coming from. So this is the thing that I've just inserted that says chicken is the thing from the previous slide. And you can see when you decompose it into different stances, the stances have less uncertainty. And for example, person-like is very low, but something like biological analogy is higher. Cognitive complexity also doesn't think that chickens are particularly likely to be conscious, but it's not impossible, right? So around this kind of 30-40% mark. All right, so those are the results, and we can chat more about them in just a second. But I want to wrap up. I want to talk about the future just for a second before I wrap up. And this is where I get to share my wish list of what I want to happen in this space. And so the first thing I want to happen is people with knowledge of the functioning of these systems, indeed some of you here, can help us calibrate our inputs in this model. We want this model to be a framework that others build on. It's not a static, it's not meant to be a final statement on any kind. We want it to be updated with new stances, new features, new indicators, new weights of the stances. So indeed, I've shown you how results are often per stance, but then there's a whole question of how you aggregate them, right? So indeed, if you have very low confidence in one of the stances, then you wouldn't give it equal weight when you're aggregating all the results. That means calibrating linkages, as I've mentioned. It means inserting data. So for a lot of these things, it's very hard to test. So we've asked experts. But ideally, we want to, on each of the indicators, and to give you an idea, we have in this model 196 or something like that indicators, over 190 indicators. We have over 80 features and about 13 stances. We're working on the 14th right now. And we want to insert observations or something that's closely resembling observations at the level of indicators, and not just people's takes on whether the indicator is present or absent. But that's what we've had to do so far because there isn't great data. And it's a very time-consuming process. We would want to see evals in an ideal world where, meet my dog area in the background, where we look at indicators and we ask throughout time for different systems, is this indicator, for example, the mirror test that I mentioned, is this present or absent? And in the end, ultimately, we hope that this framework and this model provides some sort of guiding torch to clarify our uncertainty in this space, to track it throughout time, so that we can hopefully make better decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arvo. We've got a lot of questions coming in through the Q&As, so keep them coming if you have any questions. I'm going to kick off the questions with the first question, and that's the question you probably hate getting, but what's your probability do you give to humans, chickens, and 2024 LLMs?
Oh God. I've talked about the results in a couple of places now, and people do love asking this question, and I hate dodging questions, but it's not that I'm dodging it. It's just that what I think should not matter, and that should be the caveat. But I'll try and say something. For humans, I think they're the starting point. I think we should basically think of humans as conscious, and if not, then I'm confused. I'm kind of confused what we're doing here, what we're even asking about, what it is and why we're asking about this thing that's consciousness that humans don't have. That's what I think about humans. So very close to 99 point something very high. Not 100%, because that would be too much. 0 and 100% are always too much in my mind. But too much confidence, that is. But for chickens, I would say lower than humans, but still very, very high. So I will say that we are more confident that chickens are conscious, or at least we probably could be, and this is controversial, so feel free to disagree with me in the chat, than we are about any of the stances of consciousness. So again, I think there we have these animals. There's an example of an animal that has clearly an experience of the world in some way, at least to me. So that's what I think. With AI, I just genuinely are very, very confused, and I don't know. And this is part of the reason why we're working on this model. And so I defer to some of the results, not these particular 5 stances, but some of the more kind of educated, less prone to like more simple explanations, but kind of complex weights. And I think that would be less than 5% probably right now, but not 0. And I think this could change through time. And this is the interesting thing, is to keep track of it.
Yeah, I think there's some questions around that as well. I'm going to start looking through the Q&As, and I'm going to be picking the ones with the highest votes. So if anyone wants to vote on the questions, they can. So here's one from Megan Peters. Who are the experts you're using to calibrate the model? Why were they chosen or recruited, and how do they provide the data to do so?
Great question. And just before I go fully into the Q&A, I just want to say, if you want to keep a tab on this work or other type of work that we do, there's this QR there, and I've also posted in the chat the newsletter, and we're actively looking, and so this is very related to this question, we're actively looking for experts to evaluate in the cases. So the process is as follows. We have a list of people that we've reached out to, hundreds of people that we've reached out to that we think have relevant expertise in assessing whether, in particular, AI, and it's a different list of people depending on the system. So for chickens, we asked different people to AI's 2024 LLMs, and it's been our judgment. That's the criteria, is like, do we think that they have relevant expertise to be able to say something meaningful? And we have a survey, and we ask them about the indicators that we talk about them as being hard. So this is the kind of distinction, the distinction of can we just tell that something is carbon-based versus not. And so the set of indicators that are not just easy to tell, which is many of them, we ask questions about them. It's hard to get people engaged in this. So it's not that everybody we've reached out to has been able to complete the survey, but we're actively trying to get more responses. Was there a part 2 to this question?
There
is this...
was, sorry, I just need to see there. And how do they provide the data to do so?
Well, by filling out the survey online. So we have a carefully crafted survey where I can give you a few more details. They don't just say, is this indicator present, yes or no, but they provide confidence intervals of like to see how confident they are in their yeses or in the nos, or in the kind of like what their median guess of like, yes, it's 70% a yes is, and so on.
Brilliant. So the second highest question was, what about a combination of theories such as hot and workspace? They would fill each other's gaps. But in your research, each stance is considered independent, so there's no way of combining. And lots of people has mentioned integrated information theory, ITT. So some people say it's plausible, others saying it isn't. So I guess two questions there. What about a combination of theories, and what about ITT?
Yes.
IIT, sorry.
IIT. So combination of theories, that's something you could do. So you could have a custom stance which grabs elements from both. So you could kind of, in this instance, you could name it hot plus global workspace theory. And it could say, okay, here are the features from higher order thought that we're interested in. Here are the features of the other. They, as the question said, maybe they complement each other nicely. And then you run the model for this kind of combined theory. We haven't done that. That's not something we've done for any of these theories. We haven't attempted to combine them in any kind of way. It's perfectly possible. Like that could be the 15th theory. It could be like a particular combination of theories, and you could combine any of these theories. You could kind of create a completely custom stance within the kind of language that we're using of features, indicators, etc. The second question was about this other particular theory that is popular, integrated information theory. And I think you can see it here. Here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it's kind of near the middle under the word calibration, integrated information theory. This is one of our 13 stances. And yeah, we think it's an important one to have in there. And we're actively working to improve it. It's tough because a lot of it boils down to this thing called the phi coefficient. And so it's been quite the interesting exercise to put it in terms of our model. But we've certainly tried. And here's what it says about 2024 leading LLMs, depending on two calibrations. One is very close to 0, one is closer to 20-something%, thinking that AI indeed have integrated information. Cool.
So a few people have been asking about the difference between sentience and consciousness and whether you make this distinction. A comment as well says sentience gives the room to feel, perceive, or experience subjectively the basic awareness like pain, pleasure, or emotion, while consciousness speaks to the state of being aware of that awareness, to self-reflect intentionally, and the ability to process and integrate experiences. So I guess the question is, does your, which are you trying to measure with this model? And is there a way you could, distinct between the two, make that distinction between the two using your model?
Okay, so great question. The model is about consciousness, and this is no accident that we call it the digital consciousness model. That's what we decided to do. There are a number of reasons for this, but one concern one might have is just the motivation that I gave you. Perhaps it applies to sentience, but not consciousness, right? Like, so perhaps we're less worried about under or over attributing consciousness if we got sentience right? So, and this is because some people believe that and not everybody, that to be a moral subject and to be a welfare subject, to be something that deserves our consideration. And what you really care about is the kind of like, can they suffer, Peter Singerian question of like, can they experience something with valence, not just can they have conscious experiences. We do not try and settle any of those debates with this paper. We do not try and take a stance on any of those questions. We think are very important, thorny questions. But you might think, yeah, or like ultimately what we're interested in is sentience. To those people, I would say the following: consciousness might well be necessary for sentience, and even if it's not necessary, it would, I think, it's very likely to share a lot of the same components that we're talking about here, and a lot of the same features, a lot of the same indicators, and so it would help us elucidate that, even if it turns out they're actually two separate things, and even if it turns out that they're not, they don't have this necessary or sufficient relationship. And if they do turn out, if consciousness turns out to be necessary, then this is a fantastic thing this is a fantastic first step to study, because if something isn't conscious, then it wouldn't be sentient. And the last thing, very last thing I'll say, because I think this is a very good question, and it's important to think about. The structure of the evidence and the theories in the kind of neuroscientific and the philosophy literature is much better for consciousness than it is for sentience. So this is another reason, which is a practical reason, that we think it's better to structure those literatures than to structure the sentience literature.
Okay, we've got another question from Chris Walker. You talk about the probability of consciousness, which implies that consciousness is an all or nothing thing. So you either have it or you don't. But could there not be different types or intensities of consciousness? With AI, we'll be creating entirely new kinds of minds, so our current notions of consciousness may be completely inadequate. Perhaps we will learn more about consciousness by trying to build it. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I'm taking these questions to be, what if consciousness isn't this binary all or nothing thing? What if it's continuous? How does that mesh with the framework that we're presenting? So there are three claims that we're purposefully not disambiguating between. So one is, if something is 70% conscious, it's the expected value that 70% of systems, of those types of systems, have this property, right? So that you would expect 70% of them to have this property. It could be a confidence claim, the 70%. It could be like certainty, we are 70% certain that systems have consciousness, this all or nothing thing. Or it could be this thing of degrees. They are 70% along the kind of like completely fully conscious thing, and 0% the like rock and the pebble, not at all conscious. And so we're not disambiguating between these three things, and you could interpret some of these things depending on how you're thinking about consciousness yourself.
Right. So next question is from Samuel Baker. Do you have a breakdown of the different stance probabilities that constitutes the LLM consciousness score, similar to like you showed for the chicken score? So is that graph that had the different probabilities
Yeah.
across?
Yeah, it was perhaps it was confusing, but it was the earlier one, this one.
Yeah.
So this is per stance AI, our runs of the model with AI. And it's pulling across all the simulations per stance. So for example, what that means is we're meshing together, for example, these two calibrations that I kind of disentangled in this slide. So hopefully this is what you had in mind.
Cool. I think that's just what they had in mind. Thank you. The next one's from Tom, part of the Contium team. Is the Bayesian approach approaching a frequentist approach? It's a lot of approaches there, Tom. The more theories and indicators you collect, assuming that on average new indicators are actually correlated with a true measure of consciousness, mainly asking because it might allow you to forego confidence and prior determination.
I'm not sure I fully understood this question, but this prompts me to say something about the prior. It's and to clarify a bit what kind of the Bayesian nature of this exercise is. So the first thing to say is that for pedagogical purposes, perhaps, I simplify the picture a little bit. So we're running things per stance. And if you go all the way to the top to the probability of consciousness, it wouldn't be this traditional hierarchical Bayesian framework. We're having these kind of Bayesian answers per stance only. So the full framework isn't Bayesian in the full technical sense. In fact, let me show you a picture of that. What I mean by that is the very last. Yes, so you see how these are like dotted lines. Really, the Bayesian bit is the thing that I've circled in red. That's the kind of core Bayesian thing where you have updating different nodes depending on the evidence. And we use this thing called Markov chain Monte Carlo simulations to run the model, inputting the data. There was a thing at the end about the prior. Might you remind me, Will, what the phrasing was?
Mainly asking because it might allow you to forego confidence and prior determination.
It isn't a frequentist approach. It is the Bayesian approach, and it follows the structure of Bayesian hierarchical models. So not a frequency, and indeed, so this person is right to be wary of what is the role of priors in that case. Where do they feature? And perhaps that's one of the other questions in the Q&A. I haven't looked, but you'll notice there's the 0.17 in the corner. And so for the purposes of this exercise and the preliminary results I showed you, we were assuming, and you might think this is a great or a terrible idea, that things were, I think 1 in 6 likely to be conscious. So 1 out of 6 worlds, the systems are conscious. And we assumed this for all 3 systems, and not because we think that's the right prior for all 3 systems, but just because we want to see the exercise of the model updating on that prior. And so in the case of LLMs, we went below the prior. And in both the case of chicken and humans, we updated to be higher than the prior. So in chickens, it doubled, and in humans, it almost went up to 100%. I have a slide to show you on this. I don't know, is there another, are people curious about priors in the Q&A? Is it worth spending time on this?
I think Megan had asked about priors as well. So yeah, yes,
okay,
she said yes.
I want to talk about priors, so I will. So we want to do a bunch of sensitivity analysis for this model. It's kind of essential to do some. And here what we did is we took some stances. So for example, the yellow line is 2024 LLMs, embodied agency stance, and the other one is the one just above, the orange one that goes like that, is higher order thought theory. And you can see, so x-axis is the prior that we specified, and the y-axis is kind of how much we updated. And the scale is a bit strange so that we can see it all. But if there had been no updating, that's that kind of dotted line. The scale is strange so that we can see what is happening between 0.01, which is very, very close to 0, and 0.1, where you see the systems kind of went down. For both 2024 LLMs, it's below the posterior by quite a margin. So you updated downwards. And for the humans on 2 different stances, even if you have a very tiny prior, so that's the kind of, look at the very first left pink thing, pink data point, you have a 0.01%. You say, okay, humans are 0.01% likely to be conscious. Even then, with the data, you go up to almost 20%, so something like 17% after running the model. So you go to almost certain that they're not conscious to run the model, and according to high order theory, they're like almost 20%. And of course, if the prior is higher, so like already if the prior is a bit bigger than 0.1, then you go almost to 100% very quickly. So this is kind of showing the dynamics of the model, which is to say the prior is important, but the direction of updating is at least seemingly sensible in these instances.
Okay, thanks for that. Covering those. We've got loads and loads of questions, so we're not going to have time for all of them. So I'm going to go for the highest voted. So if there's any on there that you really like the look of, do vote it up. The next highest voted is, will AGI/ASI require consciousness?
Oh, well, I take this to be a somewhat different question to the one we're asking. And so so you shouldn't consider me an expert in any sense for that purpose. But I don't see why it would. I think systems can be extremely capable without being conscious. So I wouldn't see it as a requirement. No, it could well be the case that a lot of the capabilities that we're adding kind of come with puzzle pieces of consciousness. So this is why we're tackling this question, because as different labs and companies add to these capabilities, we think we should track whether systems are more likely to be conscious.
Nice. Megan had another question, which is upvoted as well. I see she's got onto the panel. Do you want to ask it yourself, Megan?
You asked me to unmute. I don't know which one you want me to ask.
Oh, oh, sorry, I didn't realize. I must have clicked
No,
something
that's
wrong
okay.
there.
Which one were we looking at?
It was a computational functionalism.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I just wanted to know, a lot of the different stances that you have different approaches or commitment to a computational functionalism stance, right? A computational functionalism approach where like biological chauvinism says no, there's computational functionalism is not necessary, maybe. IIT certainly doesn't want to commit to computational functionalism. And yet a lot of the other theories, especially those that we went through in the report with Patrick Butlin and Rob Long, really, we were very explicit that they have a commitment to computational functionalism. So I was wondering what your particular stance is on computational functionalism and whether that is playing into your selection of stances and how eventually they might be combined if you get to that stage.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think ultimately I'll give you a less precise answer, or at least not a fully satisfying answer. I don't have a particularly strong view in favor or against. I wasn't the main person that decided which stances came in and in what order. And it certainly is the case that some of our views, and in particular some of the expertise of the team, has meant that we execute certain stances before others. So as I mentioned, we were by no means done in terms of what we would want to see exemplified. And you're totally right. So if we had a general picture of consciousness and we kind of did this kind of like taxonomy of things, we would see more of a cluster in some groups than others. And I think that's more, some of that is because we think some of these theories are particularly plausible, and some of my colleagues have at least persuaded me in some ways, but is by no means a final commitment to computational functionalism or against it when we're talking about stances that lie outside of it. And so it sounds like we would really use your help with developing further stances, and I would love to stay in touch to make sure that we cover more bases. I will just say one final thing, which is the weights can, like, if you thought that computational functionalism had too much emphasis, then you could readjust the weights of the 13 stances so that the other ones shine through a bit more, the ones that aren't so if you thought that was the way to go. So you could kind of run Megan's version of things and do it that way and aggregate the results in that fashion.
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty committed to computational functionalism myself. But you've started tackling a really extremely hard problem in a sophisticated way. So kudos to you, and I can't wait to see where it goes.
Brilliant. Well, we'll set up a meeting after.
Yeah.
So we're getting towards the end. I'm going to ask one more question. And it's about the model. I guess it's about the future of the model. So as AI architectures evolve, from large language models to agents or embodied systems potentially, how flexible is your model's framework for integrating new features or theories?
We've certainly tried to make it as flexible as possible. So the idea is, even if some of the stances or some of the things that they say, in particular with respect to their features and sub-features and indicators, are antiquated and become outdated, or we just no longer believe in them, the idea is that this work is not therefore useless. First, it tracks this like historical perspective, but second, you can just remove the indicators that you thought were antiquated, for example, and bring in the new ones within the framework, and that wouldn't disrupt this whole method. That wouldn't disrupt anything at all. And those that you think are still valuable, you can keep using the data for those if you think that data is good, or you can bring new data if you thought that a particular batch of data was problematic in any way. So this is one thing that we are committed to, is to make this a more flexible approach, because of the uncertainty. We know that this is a space with a large amount of uncertainty, with a lot of work happening right now, more about to happen with AI being developed further. And we want this to be able to cope with all the newness. So yes, that's certainly the intention.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it, going forward? The uncertainty is huge. And as Megan said there, I just want to echo, you guys are doing a great job trying to solve a really tough problem, even if we're just at the beginning. So that's why I enjoyed seeing your work when I saw it down in London and thought we had to have you on. I'm afraid that's all we're going to have time for today. But if you want to follow up, feel free to reach out to Arvo or myself. There's lots of links in the chat, or you can look us up on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Arvo, for joining us. And thank you all the viewers as well for the questions. We had loads and loads of questions coming in. And thanks, Megan. Sorry for unmuting you without giving you warning. And hopefully we'll catch some of our viewers as well in 2 weeks' time for our next meetup. So Arvo, anything you want to say before we
just thank you so much, Will and Prism, for having me and for having us chat about digital consciousness.
Brilliant. Well, until next time, take care and speak soon, Arvo. Bye.